It's totally okay, BJ. Uh, we will. I see you're currently in a D&D game, so we'll be missing the Q&A against your will. That's fine. Hey, don't worry, I'm gonna record it. It's recording right now. It's still recording. Good. I will post it up. Hmm. Thank you. I have unmuted myself. I I'm still learning how to do this. Okay, so let's answer the first question. Um, what did the adventurers find in the mist? So part of the whole thing about Myzelis is that the mists cover a lot of places that have been returned to nature. They've been returned to a much more natural state. Um, and the way that they're returned to that much more natural state is by Vrokíva, who is the Aethri of the mist. Um, so these adventurers, these explorers that are constantly trying to make this work, every generation has a set of adventurers that are just like, what if this time it works? What if I can go out there and I can find something? Maybe I can find a new path that leads to, another pocket of civilization. Maybe I can find a way to get from, say, Frederick's campaign down to, like, let's say, down to Eni El Shalah, down to Hawks's campaign. What if we can go directly, without having to follow one of the ley lines, which is the safe route? And the way that you do that, way traditionally would have been that these people basically were just throwing away their lives. They were like, well, maybe this will be the time. There's no way to know. And they would go out into the mist. Vrokíva would claim them. They would never be seen again. And so it's different for each generation why they were going out into the mist. A lot of them tried to, like, basically follow through on ideas that others before them had tried and never come back successfully before. But it's also very unique to each setting. So in some campaign settings, some DMs will have basically set it up so that the adventurers that return that are unique to their settings, for, like, say, Rilamir, which is Frederick's campaign, their adventuring group may have been trying to find something that was lost, or they may have been trying to find a path, a route that leads to uh, another very important location, or a trade route or something like that. Whatever the reason was that they originally went out there, they pretty universally would have found a lot of very natural, very wild spaces. Um, as a side, I guess, benefit of Vrokíva's influence, the healing of the earth also means the replenishment of resources. So they would have found, like, basically like untapped resources. They would have found massive forests full of all kinds of life, just teeming with life. Because Vrokíva doesn't have so much of a vengeful, issue with any other life form. She specifically dislikes humanoids because humanoids are the ones that are always trying to mess with the natural order of things. They're always trying to basically tweak the world around them as opposed to trying to live naturally with it. Um, so they may, there may be like whole jungles out there, islands chock full of all kinds of strange new fruit and vegetables and life-giving resources, things that people had never seen before, combinations of life that had never been seen before. Um, and that's kind of the upside, that they may have found like an old mine that back in the age of stone would have been stripped completely, all the gold dragged out of the earth, all of the diamonds or the other gems or minerals dragged out of the earth. Vrokíva rolls in and basically wipes that mine off of the map and literally reseeds the earth with all of those nutrients, all of those resources. And then when the mist peels back and these adventurers come through, they find just this bounty of whatever could possibly be there. So, these adventurers may have come back, these explorers may have come back and said, whoa, I struck gold. I just found a massive, massive amount of money just waiting out there for the taking. And that could be the inspiration for some of these people to go out and try to capture those resources. For certain other cultures, it may just be a situation where they want to find things that they lost. There could be parts of the civilization that were captured by Vrokíva and have just been subsumed by the mist for thousands of years, and they went out there to basically try and find those pockets of civilization, maybe try and find some survivors or that sort of thing. So it really depends. It depends upon the different campaign. It really depends upon who these explorers or adventurers were. So that's definitely a question for your DM. Let's see, what's the next question here? I'm going to read through the website info on World Anvil really soon, I swear. So this should already be answered, and I don't know. Just feel free. Okay, question. It's fine. It's fine. The whole point of this experiment, this Q&A, is that I can go through everything. So even if you did read it, maybe it might be something that you didn't, like, you either don't remember, or like maybe you skimmed it and you didn't like completely, like oh, that it didn't sink in. So we're just going to go through everything. So any question is fine. Excuse me. Are there people who make homesteads in the mist a ways away from major civilized or populated areas? So yes, there are people out there. The people that exist out in the mists typically exist on like tiny ley lines. So whereas the major civilizations, like the ones that are on the map behind me, would be, the concentrations of multiple ley lines, lots of layering, kind of almost a network of this energy that the civilization was able to tap into to kind of like defend themselves. There could still be spots where instead of having, say, hundreds of different ley lines kind of intersecting, like there might be in, let's say, Rilamir right here, maybe here, there could be a tiny little intersection of two ley lines where just a small village lives. And you'd never be able to find it if you just went out into the mists, because the ley lines that lead to it are very weak, very almost imperceptibly weak. And it's only because they join up with another ley line, another equally weak ley line, that sort of little pocket of resistance exists. It's not that Vrokíva is basically like a force of nature. Vrokíva is very vengeful, and Vrokíva doesn't differentiate between people, like different peoples in the world. But Vrokíva's attention is lessened against people who have otherwise figured out how to coexist with nature and try to minimize the resources that they try to gather. And so it's very likely that Vrokíva is too busy in a way. Like it would take more energy than it's worth to try to wipe those people off of the face of the planet, So there certainly could be little pocket civilizations out there in the mist that are just waiting to be basically rediscovered and connected with. There could also be civilizations out there in the mist that figured out how to deal with being on their own and never tried to reconnect with anywhere else. Like in the real world, there could be civilizations out there that just don't want to be contacted and are literally perfectly happy to live in their tiny little pocket of Myzelis and just never be discovered. There could be like an island thousands of miles off of the map that's just sitting there, perfectly happy and content to just be in their own kind of little world, so to speak, and never have anything to do with any of the politics of the rest of the setting. So it's totally possible. It's typically people who either try to upset that balance, so typically people who go out there with the intention to try and like mess with Vrokíva and mess with the balance of nature, and civilizations that were just unlucky. A lot of civilizations right around the time of the Ripple, which was about 2,800 years or 28,000 years before the beginning of the setting, before the present day, I should say. Um, Sometimes it was just wrong place, wrong time. They just happened to be in a spot where Vrokíva's wrath was strong, and some civilizations got overlooked. So I hope that answers your question. Um, how dangerous is the mist, and what monsters exist in the mist? So the mist is dangerous because of two things. One, it is the mist itself is animate. It has power, and that power is the ability to basically strip things down to their base elements, um, to effectively revert things, to basically turn one type of nature into another type of nature. Vrokíva is a very transmutative deity. Um, and shares a lot in common with, say, like transmutation spells. So she has a lot of power over basically being able to, say, transmute the arms and armor of a knight into just dust or wood or like basically just shred it off of that person, make the ages pass for it, and just cause it to crumble. Um, Vrokíva also has the ability to change people in that way. She has near infinite control over what mortals become when they enter the mist. And there are certainly the potential for creatures that enter the mist to remain unchanged and just be lost until they naturally die, or creatures that enter the mist could very quickly be transmuted into something else. So in that way, the mist itself is dangerous. The other way that the mist is dangerous is those other transmuted creatures, because Vrokíva uh, has the ability to control a great deal of what goes on in the mist, but the mist is repelled by the Leylines, and so on occasion, Vrokíva will try to basically expel things from the Broom being the other name for the mist, um, into civilization to soften it up. Because the ley lines and the people that live there kind of feed off of each other. So destroying like the people that live in a civilization, like killing them and like dragging them into the mist, can also, yes, thank you, Gage. The Brume is the name for the Broom, or the mist. By causing damage to the civilization, you can actually, um, she can actually encroach further. And so to do that, she will either weaponize the creatures that were in the mist, so basically transmute them into something that serves her purposes, um, which is basically a form of possession. Um, it's not going to always be the same, because again, Vrokíva has like near infinite potential. But one thing, for instance, that the people in Gilead, and as a side note, this is going to be a recurring thing, most of the answers I'm going to be able to give you are either general answers, or I will be giving you specific answers for what life is like in Gilead. Gilead's and Aethri, the hub city. They have their own mythos, they have their own gods, they have their own whole cosmology and their own view of history. It's not the only view of history, and it certainly isn't the only truth in the world. But I will be able to give you more detail talking about what truth means for Gileaders as opposed to the other settings, because I've given the DMs freedom to make their own truth for those other settings. So, in the case of Gilead, um, along the edges of that civilization, along the edges of the map there, and in a lot of the Gilead mythos, um, creatures often come back out of the mist, literally possessed by the Broom. The mist pours out of their orifices, out of their mouths, out of their nose, sometimes out of their eyes and ears, sometimes out of like their hands. They almost seem like zombified, except they aren't like, like impaired in their ambulatory, like they don't walk around like zombies, like shuffling. They move normally, or possibly maybe even a little bit more intensely, but they are literally possessed by the Broom. They are filled with it, and it's kind of the most simple way that Vrokíva can turn creatures that enter the Broom back against civilization is literally possessing them and then turning them back to destroy what they once tried to preserve. It's a fate that often befalls a lot of people that go into the Broom. Another thing that can happen is Vrokíva will literally create new creatures, and those creatures could be very small. And I mean impossibly small, as in Vrokíva could create diseases, could create poisons, and literally just use those sort of natural powers of nature to assault civilizations that live along the edge of the mist. She could create, a disease and like possess a bunch of rats and just send them into, a township on the edge of the Broom and just start poisoning everyone there. She could possess, say a civilization that once lived inside an area that is now controlled by the Broom, and you could see something more like a kind of like a traditional D&D setting, because we don't do the whole like goblins are always evil thing. But you could have a civilization of goblins that all became possessed by the Broom, and now every so often they rush out of the Broom in waves and assault whatever town is nearby. And it's not to say against goblins, it's Vrokíva expressing her rage. And I think the most dangerous and kind of the highest tier of things that you might expect coming out of the mist, and certainly the subject of many terrible stories in Gilead, are creatures that in modern day might be considered to be like kaiju, like your Godzilla, your Mothra, your massive creatures that come out of the mist that are not just possessed by the mist, but are literally created by Vrokíva expressly for this purpose, and they will smash their way through anything they run across until a large enough group of defenders, in the case of Gilead, the Rangers working together with the Gilead Guard and basically all the other parts of that society coming together to try and pool their resources to stop it. So yeah, I mean, you can see things at pretty much every level of that scale, up to and including things that are just impossibly large. But it does expect a lot of, it does require a lot of Vrokíva's energy to do so. So it's not something that happens very often. Sending things out of the mist into places that are covered with the leyline energy is difficult. It's very difficult for her, which is why she tends to attack just like the edges of civilization. So let's see, what's the next question from Sean? If areas are not separated by the mist, is regular travel knowledge of different areas common or uncommon? Would people in Ilorin know of trade travel with people in Escaleza or Gilead? Okay, so this is one of the things that's answered in the kind of overview that's on the website, but part of the whole purpose of this Q&A is going over that stuff and making sure people don't miss it. This is basically how it works. There is an out-of-character answer to this question. There's an in-character answer to this question. I'm going to do the out-of-character one real quick. The whole point of Myzelis, the reason that we're doing things this way in Season 2, is I wanted to give all of my DMs the opportunity to create their own campaign setting inside a greater campaign setting that has room for all of them, extra room to grow, and there's enough magic involved that things can be different in different parts of the campaign setting. So magic operates differently in different lands. What happens with magic in one DM's territory could be different from another DM's territory. Not wildly different, but there could be some like marked differences on how things work. It would explain why, say, in Season 1, using resurrection magic, you met resistance. Sometimes the gods would require you to really justify the spell that you cast so that you could bring back someone from the dead. In Season 2, there could be an area where that's the case. There could be like a particular campaign setting where that's still the case. And in another campaign setting, or in Gilead, it could be that the spell just functions as it does. When you cast Resurrection, you don't have to, it doesn't stop time, you don't have to talk to anybody. the spell just happens. Um, so that being said, like that was the point, was to just be able to basically make miniature campaign settings inside of a campaign setting. And in order to facilitate that and to have it make sense in character, and this is getting into the in character answer now, we basically came up with a rationale, a lore for how there could be that much separation, but there would still be a connective tissue between all the different campaigns. So the first thing we did is we completely covered the map in mist, and we said, okay, anywhere that we're not defining is covered in this mist. The mist is a complete mystery. We call it the Broom. It is just basically a place where anything could be possible. And then we had the DMs expose little parts. So there, now you have the different campaign settings, right? You have your, like right here, we have Eslakeza, that's Kevin Reason's area. Up here we have Frederick's area, that's Rilamir. And basically we had them uncover parts of the map and just basically said, these are the parts where civilization exists. And then we had to figure out a way to connect them, because we didn't want people to join the season 2 and think, well, first of all, I'm never going to see people who are from another campaign. There would be no way to coordinate any kind of a world event because everyone would be completely cut off. So we had to create some sort of a connective tissue. So what we did is we said that there are ley lines that connect all of the different, basically all the different campaigns. And all of those ley lines meet up at the very least at the middle of the map, which is Gilead's and Aethri, that tiny island, comparatively tiny island at the very center of the map. And those ley lines, travel along them to these major campaign settings is relatively safe. And I won't say a 100% safe, because traveling into the mist is always a little creepy, but and potentially dangerous. But compared to trying to just go out directly into the mist where there is no ley line to follow, that's just a death sentence, or it was until literally this year. For the past 25,000, 28,000 years of Myzelis' history, going out not on a ley line was basically an instant death sentence, or at least you were lost forever. But traveling along the ley lines is safe enough that you can actually have an exchange of cultures. You can have basically different groups interacting with each other. You can have people traveling through Gilead for trade or for education. You can have politics. You can have an exchange of technology and things like that. So traveling to Gilead from any campaign setting is always a given. Traveling from one campaign setting to another campaign setting is not. So you can always get to Gilead. You can't always go from one campaign setting to another campaign setting over here directly, but you can always go through the center of the map. So as a general rule, as of this point in history, all of the campaign settings that the DMs have made are at least connected to Gilead, and have been for at least long enough that everyone knows about everyone else. Common knowledge aside, because you could still have commoners that are like, where's that? I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with the stuff that I'm doing, the farming that I'm doing over here. But knowledgeable sorts and people who are paying attention, people at least who are paying attention to whatever passes for the news, or listening to scholars that they know, bards that they know, stories that have been told, would be familiar with all of these campaign settings. So it is not unreasonable to expect that your average bard would know at least of everywhere else in the world that has been exposed on the map behind me. And travel is free enough that and this is an out of character thing, a character from one campaign setting, so somebody playing their character in one person's game, could pick up and move that character to another person's game. Like that was the out of character goal. We wanted to make sure that people would feel like they're in a connected world, because you are, but we would also want it to be possible with minimal issues for someone to go from here to there due to an out of character reason or whatever reason, maybe your schedule shifted. Now you have to play a different game. So we wanted to make sure that that made sense in character. So we still have enough open space for DMs to make their own unique thing, but it's still connected. So that's the whole point of like the mist and the connective ley lines and things like that. So to answer your question more succinctly and kind of wrap that up, regular knowledge and travel to different areas is common enough that there are regular caravans. It's not something you could do on a lark. Sometimes it takes a while, and it's always dangerous enough that you would want to take protection. Like you'd want to have like a protected caravan. But it's doable. It's regular. Happens all the time. And people on one of the campaign settings, any one of the campaign settings the DMs are running right now, will know of Gilead, and they will know of the other campaign settings. Some of them have been connected and established for longer. I think Eslakeza has been established for long enough that they've actually already begun construction projects and basically like have major trades with Gilead. Some of them are more new. I think the newest connection was to Eniel Shala, which is DM Hawks' campaign. Their people have literally just stopped being separate. Like they kind of held the world at arm's length and have just now started to get back into politics. So it depends on the setting, but they all know of each other at the very least. Let's see, what's the next question? Does the broom still move around, or does it just spit things out now? So I did touch on that a second ago, but to be more clear, the broom is constantly testing the edges of civilization. So you can expect that Vrokíva is always trying to reduce any of the open area that you see on this map to zero. Like she's always trying to just, because in her perfect world, everything would be covered in mist, and everything would be completely natural, and it would just be blissful, peaceful. She might even get over it at that point, because it would also mean that all of Gilead would have healed, or sorry, all of oh my goodness, Myzelis. Thank you. Too many proper downs. All of Myzelis would have healed at that point, because there are still parts, especially like anywhere that you'd see like one of these super buildings, like these sort of super constructs, like the huge bridges in Gilead, the canals in Gilead, any of these major buildings that were created back in the Age of Stone. She intensely wants to tear them down, root and stem. She wants to shred every building that exists, and she wants to restore it completely to natural state. I'm sure people would still exist in Vrokíva's Myzelis, but they would be like feral. They'd be animalistic. So humanoids would basically just be reduced to any other animal. And they would live in harmony with the world around them. And probably not be at the top of the food chain. They'd probably just be, like basically monkeys at that point. Or big lizards in some cases. So yeah, I mean, it does still move around. It's still always testing. It's never safe. The thing that's changed as of the beginning of this campaign setting is that people who have tested it in return have finally come back and have, for the first time since the Broom was created, have finally actually succeeded on what they set out to do, as opposed to just being lost forever. So, okay, so next question. Does Vrokíva ever try to skew travelers off the leyline paths? How do people manage to navigate across the ley lines if they aren't magic users? Oh, sorry, I can't read this. If the ley lines are invisible. Okay, so sorry, there's like a window I can't move. So the ley lines themselves are invisible. That is true. You don't see like a magical effect going off in that direction. So typically the movement along the ley lines is done by people who are in possession of like maps and old like cartography that lets them navigate those ley lines reliably. So they know the landmarks between here and there, And because these are places along a ley line, Vrokíva doesn't have the ability to mess with them very much. So if there's a mountain along this ley line, the mountain will always be there. If there is a particular forest, the forest will always be there. Vrokíva has to actively try to destroy a ley line to actually, would actually have to try to fight everyone that goes along that ley line to kind of get the influence necessary for her powers to work in that area and tear things apart. In other words, it would take people abandoning the ley line, like basically going, you know what, it's too dangerous to go to Gilead, so we're just going to stop doing it. Then the mists could kind of come in and just sort of like make it as dangerous as anywhere else. It still wouldn't be ever quite as dangerous as going off a ley line, but like she'd be completely over it and she could cover it with monsters and stuff like that. But generally speaking, most people who travel along a ley line do it with protection. So they'll have an entire convoy of people traveling together. Um, the ships will have defenses, that sort of thing. And it's not enough resistance, typically. I'm not going to say 100%, but typically it's not dangerous enough to dissuade trade. And that's kind of the key behind, or through which pretty much everything else is measured in terms of safety. If the merchants feel it's safe enough to be profitable, then it's probably pretty safe, generally speaking, because there's a lot of trading that happens in Myzelis, and it happens along these ley lines every day. So, generally speaking, attacks are rare, and usually people are equipped enough to deal with them. The ley lines. Sorry, the question is, what made the ley lines? Ley lines always existed. They are a lattice of basically the connective tissue of magic. Um, they're basically the foundation upon which the magic of the world exists. So there are places where a lot of ley lines connected, and they are places of extreme power. They may have inherent magical qualities, such as the forest at the heart of Gilead, which is literally almost a magical artifact unto itself. For those of you who don't know, the Heartswood at the heart of Gilead's Aethri, which is the hub city at the very heart of the map, anywhere inside that forest, if you set foot inside that forest, you lose the ability to take offensive action against other people. And it doesn't matter if it was like you had intended to punch somebody, or you intended to stab them, or you were going to kill them in some other way, or if you were going to steal from them. You basically, your empathy gets cranked up through the roof, and you feel, well, no, that'd be a shitty thing to do to that person. I don't want to do that. So you're basically like super empathic towards other people when you're in that forest, and that's a natural function of that ley line, because it is the connection. It's the heart of the entire ley line network. It's naturally synergistic for people who are in that ley line to just feel a connection to every other living being. So there are places along these ley lines that have just always been kind of highly magical, and they've always existed, but they were never as important as they are now. Civilizations before the Broom, which again, the Broom was created around the year 28,000 years before present day. Before the Ripple, which was the event that created the Broom and Vrokíva, these civilizations gravitated towards. Many civilizations gravitated towards areas that had high magical significance, so they kind of naturally settled on top of these ley lines. But the ley lines weren't important to the average everyday person. Like, they were helpful to like people who used magic in those civilizations. They were very useful to the Aethri, the gods that were literally, manipulating that magic and trying to wrest control of it. But the average person didn't care. But now that the Broom exists, the Broom is repelled by those ley lines, the stronger the connection of magic, the stronger that the connection of all those ley lines are together. It's almost like a magnet, like an opposite end of the magnet. It literally pushes the broom backwards. It pushes the mist away. So it's more that the ley lines weren't created by any particular person, and they certainly weren't created at the same time that that Vrokíva sprang into being and the Broom sprang into being. They just gained importance in that time. And so now living along ley lines and traveling along them has become much more important, whereas before people could go in any direction. If you were a merchant and you had enough defenses against like the kind of the mundane threats in the world, you could just get your stuff together and sail in a direction and be like, I'm going to sell people rugs over there, and it'd be fine. But now you have to follow the ley lines, so everybody's got an expert on the ley lines for keeping track of that sort of thing. So next question. So I can see why land-based routes would be mostly safe, but what about sea routes? Could a natural storm push a ship off of a ley line? Generally speaking, travel along the ley line routes is safe no matter whether you're doing it on land or at sea. If you are sailing, just because there's a fog around you, like horizontally, does not necessarily mean that there's a fog above you. Which makes it so that it's still possible to navigate using the stars, which is traditionally how people would navigate at sea anyway. And the fog is greatly diminished. That Broom is greatly diminished when you're on a ley line compared to when you're actually like in the Broom. So you could still probably see to the horizon or near the horizon if you were traveling along a ley line, and so you could still get your bearings on the star charts. You'd have to be pretty far off the beaten path to actually be in danger of Vrokíva reaching out and like grabbing your ship's mast and trying to pull you off that chart, that course. And the only exception, really, to kind of segue into another thing about the Broom is all of these precautions. The living on the ley lines, trying to stay away from the edges of civilization, certainly not going into the mist, but all of these precautions are general assumptions that people make, and they have been generally correct enough that they've kind of become the common assumptions of the realm. Like everyone in Myzelis knows these things, so to speak. It doesn't mean that Vrokíva isn't capable of surprise, and a major surprise that she can level at you usually comes when someone near you is actively abusing magic or actively abusing the realm. And by abuse, I mean using magic or using a large amount of people power to tear up nature. So if you go out and you're basically like, ooh, I found a mine and it has gold in it, I'm going to use magic and all of these people that I know, and we are going to uproot this entire area. We're going to dig a massive trench, like the sort of mines that you see in present day that are just like so big they actually affect the air pressure around them and helicopters can't fly over them and stuff like that. If you do things like that, Vrokíva becomes upset. And when Vrokíva becomes upset, she has the ability to do things and the want to do things well above and beyond what she would normally do. And it doesn't just have to be if you're manipulating nature. As I said, if you're abusing magic in general, it messes with the ley lines. And so it's almost like basically you're lowering your own defenses. Good examples of things that people could do to incense Vrokíva directly, that were kind of hinted at in the magic item list, by the way, on the website. Trying to generate infinite amounts of money with magic items that say that they are endless. If you have a decanter of endless water and you leave it open someplace and it literally creates another entire body of water, you'd better believe Vrokíva will come after you. She has a sense for people who attempt to basically bend the rules. Um, People who attempt to basically try to follow in the footsteps of the Aethri that were doing the things that literally spawned her in the first place. Her primary goal is to destroy any capacity to bring back another age of stone, which was the era, the part of the Aethrit era, which was the era before the mortal era, so the one right before this, where the gods were literally just taking Myzelis and just turning it into whatever they wanted, with complete disrespect for the planet itself. Like just carving into it, reshaping it, flipping it upside down, throwing it into space, breaking the sun, breaking a moon, blowing up another moon. Like who knows what people have even forgotten about that they were trying to do. Vrokíva is the natural reaction to that. So you better believe that the more you do to upset her, the more she comes after you. And she'll come after you even if you think you're safe. So that's something to think about. People who are otherwise not upsetting her can usually depend upon the fact that she won't come after them, unless they're really silly about how they do it. All right, next question. Are there any items, like a piece of rock from the Leylines, that protects you from the Broom? Let's see. My first instinct is to answer that by just saying no. The whole point of the Broom is that anything that goes into it is subject to Vrokíva's power. There certainly will be stories about things that break this paradigm, and whether or not those things are true are something that you'd have to discover. It's certainly not something that would be universally, objectively known. Not necessarily because Vrokíva has an ability to just like basically stop people from knowing about those kinds of things. It's not something that she does. It's not her power. But the people who attempt it, who say, yeah, just buy this rock and it'll, snake oil salesman kind of thing, are usually wrong. And the people that believe them are never seen again. And it's hard to pull those people afterward. You can't exactly, petition the people that found out the hard way that they had been sold, snake oil. If the problem that they bought the snake oil for destroys them utterly or disappears them forever. So it's hard to dispute, and it's even harder to test if those things are true. But some of the DMs, some of the campaign settings, there may or may not be truth to say what some of these adventurers that have returned from the Broom as of this year, as the beginning of the Age of Exploration, they may have gone out there with trinkets that they swear up and down were the reason that they survived. And they may or may not be right. This is a situation where there could be a lot of faith placed in things for no reason as well, where an adventurer comes back and immediately sells everything they were wearing and says, obviously something on me protected me from the Broom. So if you want it, give me 1,000 gold for my pants or something like that, So there's a possibility that there's a truth to it, but the chances of it not being true are much, much higher. So it's definitely a thing you'd have to explore in the game. It's not necessarily something that I can confirm for you here in this Q&A, but I will open up the potential for it. So there's a slowdown in the questions. So what I'm going to do is what I had originally intended. I'm going to go through the announcements real quick and just make sure everybody knows what's going on. Don't worry, you can keep writing questions. I'm just going to go through the announcements real quick and just make sure we're all on the same page. And anybody who might have skimmed any of this stuff, just refresher, so to speak, and also provide context for these items. So going up to the announcements channel, I'm just going to go down through it real quick. The setting, obviously, the setting is called Myzelis, the Land of Mists. Important caveat, something that you may not know. Myzelis and Armea are separate. They are not connected. They are completely different campaign settings. The only thing that may be the same between them is that we have seeded homages, as you might say. Things that are references to things from Season 1 that are not exactly the same thing. For instance, and I'm going to spoil it now just because I think it's funny. If you look at the map of Gilead and Aethri, which is on sorry, not the World Anvil yet, but it's on the website. You go to the Myzelis introduction and look for the map of the city, not the island, not the world map like behind me, but the actual city itself. And you zoom all the way in to the Heartswood Forest and look at the stone structure at the very center of it. One of the Season 1 players asked for a seed of the world tree to be planted. And while I did not grant their wish directly, because again, that would be a direct reference to Season 1, a massive stone superstructure at the heart of Gilead and Aethri is an homage to that request. So, specifically, it is called Ed Karad, the stone tree, in honor of Ed W., who played my game at the end of Season 1. It is basically a massive stone superstructure that is fashioned to look something like the roots of a tree climbing up towards the sky. It is not at all the exact same thing that I was given. The character very specifically in Season 1 that he played had a physical seed from the world tree of Season 1, which I think was an invention of Harrison's. And he was like, I'd like to plant this in Season 2. And so throughout the world, you may see that the other fellow DMs have taken characters that you've played before, characters that have been canonized, things that were canonized, and things that were requested in that Season 2 suggestions thing that we posted at the end of Season 1, and have basically taken it and created an homage and seeded it somewhere into the world. So there are other places like that. There are other things like that that are just basically our way of making sure that you guys know that even though Season 1 is over, the things that you created were still very important. And so literally, and kind of metaphorically and literally, they are a foundation for Season 2. So, expect to see those things. They're kind of like Easter eggs in the world, So while Armea and Myzelis might be completely separate places, they're still out of character the same group of people, So a lot of the things that we enjoyed about Season 1 are, in there somewhere, baked and, kind of cooking, right? So expect that that's still in there. I'm going to skip back and see if there are any other questions real quick before I keep going. Is it possible to save someone that got infected with the Broom? That's another question that is not something I'm going to reveal to you if it is possible objectively. All I'm going to say is try it. Okay, so I'm going to skip back up to the user guide, or the announcements real quick. So yes, so it's Myzelis, the Land of Mist. I think we've gone into pretty extensively how the Broom works and what the whole point of the setting was. Gilead and Aethri, the hub, that sort of thing. The campaigns, again, to just go over it real quickly: Gilead, Talali, Rilamir, Ularan, Eslakeza, and Urvasath, Kokaris, Kaido, Verbera, Belgravia, Scaphile, Eniel Shala, the Dire Isle, Veshnika, and we have room for more DMs to make more worlds, or for our existing DMs to make more worlds. I know that when we get to the point where we can go back into the store, you guys who might be missing DM Reese right now will be pleased to know that Reese is ready to start running again, but is just waiting until we actually get back into the store because his connection issues. He's not able to do the online stuff. So expect that we'll, as our community grows, and as we're able to get back into the store, we're going to expand our games. There's going to be plenty more room in Myzelis for more campaign settings, and certain DMs that like DM Reese are already ready to just jump right back in. All we have to do is modify the map, create a new connection, a new ley line opens up, and now you can explore this all new place. So, like, this is a extensive list of campaigns, but it is by no means what we're going to end up with by the time we're done with season 3, which hopefully will be many years from now. You guys know how the games work. 4-hour session, 15-minute break, $10 for 4-hour session. You know, that's pretty classic. But we decided to rename the one-on-ones, if you guys remember those, and the canonization sessions as just extra sessions. So whatever you want our attention for, whatever you want us to do for an extra 2 hours, you pay the DM $20. You know, kind of like a therapist. We basically sit there and work out whatever it is you need to work out. If you need to do something outside of the scope of your normal game time, you need to go accomplish a task that really only requires your character, we're for it. If you want to just kind of fill in time that you had to spend away, like you missed a session or two, we can do that too. If you even if you get like a group of people together and you guys are like, oh, we just want to do something as a little group or whatever, we'll figure it out. But it also covers things like canonizations. If you want your character to be put up on the world endle as we populate it, that's how you do that. And if you want to create a faction, so if you, through the course of your role play, get to a point where you and your DM feel like you have the resources and kind of the NPC base to create a faction all your own, much like, say, the Mr. Network from Season 1, we are prepared to handle that as well. And so it would require an extra session. You'd sit down with a DM and they would help you basically figure out what your new faction is so other people could be a part of it. And we'll like pool your resources and keep track of them and that kind of thing. So yeah, extra sessions are pretty cool. And then another important note on the games, something people might have overlooked. One of the major things that we're going to be doing with the games is we have some that are basically fitting a schedule that we've kind of homogenized of 12 to 4 or 5 to 9. Back in the day, Dark Tower used to be open until 10 p.m. For certain games, it was open till midnight, but like they definitely don't want to do that anymore. And I don't blame them, but you know, it's too bad because a lot of us are night owls, right? But the idea is that I homogenize the schedule, so it's 12 to 4, 5 to 9, 2 games per block, and that's the maximum number that can be run at the store at any given time. As soon as it becomes safe to do so, a lot of these games are going to transport back into the store, and you guys will be able to play like we used to. You know, you'll be able to sit down and roll your clicky clacks and look at your little miniatures that you bought off of, you know, Hero Forge or whatever. I'm looking forward to it too. I've spent, oh no, I just spent $650 buying another Reaper Kickstarter. So I've got like 650 models and like a pirate ship this big waiting for me in like April of next year. So I'm really looking forward to playing in person again. And I'm sure a lot of you are too. Just know that we've kind of baked that into the schedule. So each game, as you may have seen already has a listing like this is when, you know, these games will be returning to Dark Tower. These games won't. And we tried to give you that forewarning so that way you could be prepared in case like you could only attend a game online for whatever reason. You wouldn't be surprised when suddenly the game is only run in person. So let me hop back over to the channel. Let's see if there are any other questions. Here we go. Oh yeah, sorry Hawks. I'm sorry if I'm butchering Entil Shala. Did I get that right? Entil Shala? Did I get that right, Hawks? I'm sorry. I'm bad. Close. I'm sorry. You know what? I'm gonna have to get you in front of the screen. You're gonna have to record it. Oh, that does raise another good point. Along that line, pronunciation guide. A lot of my DMs and myself included love to come up with names that are like, what in the world is this bundle of consonants and vowels? or even names that seem like they're supposed to be pronounced pretty, clearly, but then like we pronounce them completely different. One thing that we are going to be doing and putting onto the World Anvil is little buttons you can click next to these important names that have a pronunciation. So you'll be able to hear what it sounds like aloud. I mean, obviously your DMs will be using these proper nouns, but if you're on the internet and you're not currently playing your game and you're just like, hey, how do I even pronounce this? Like, it'll be there for you. Yeah, Runic is fun to work with. Okay, so Simic Hybrids. Um, the explanation that we provided for a lot of these races that come specifically from uh, campaign settings, like very specific campaign settings, are that in a lot of cases it has to do with how the DMs want to handle that in their own settings. So there may be a different explanation for different parts of the world, but there is basically there's supposed to be room for all of them. And we kind of used season one as like an example for how they could potentially be used. For the case of the Simic hybrids, we were like, "Yo, they come from the Fey Wild. They're literally just people who are just kind of like part beast, and they've just sort of like over the many millennia just kind of transmuted into different forms." And I feel like for the Simic hybrid specifically, that's probably what we will continue to do. And I know that I personally am advocating for that for at least Gilid, is that there's just people who have just sort of come from either parts of Myzelis where such a thing was more common. Perhaps there was a leyline where the Feywild was extremely close to the prime material plane, and so these sort of hybridizations just became more and more common as these sort of like anthropomorphic creatures, just sort of like intermingled with humanoids and just created, these other races. So it's not from Gilid, it's not necessarily like they were experiments or anything like that. From Gilid's perspective, these are just another race of people. To that end, we have basically the same sort of description for the Vidalcan. They're not extraordinary in comparison to all the other extraordinary races. So we have Vidalcan for the same reason that we have High Elves. They're just a different type of humanoid with a different background, and they were created by a different in Aethri. This does raise a good point, and it's not something that I delved into particularly on the website, but it is an important thing to know about Myzelis' history. It was just a little bit too granular for the already like 7,000 paragraphs that I had written for that thing, for that walkthrough of Myzelis. So, but I'll get into it now because it is important. It is something that most people would know if they, were knowledgeable about history. In the beginning of the Aethri era, which was about 50,000 years before present day. Yes, the Aethri, which are the gods, as like your traditional sorts of gods, because they're the Ankari that are the gods of like the spirits of nature. And then you have your Aethri, who are basically like the spirits of like concepts. Like they're the gods of the god of war, the god of the forge, the god of peace, the god of corruption or death, like that kind of thing. The Aethri were created from a kind of progenitor humanoid race called the Aethri. So at this point, because we like a little bit of evolution in our setting. One of the things that I think was probably weakest about season one is that it was only 15,000 years, or sorry, not even 15,000 years. It was only 1,500 years to like 1,900 years of like setting, and then everything before that was just like, I don't know, gods were doing things, right? And it was possible to delve into some of that, but it certainly wasn't recorded, so it was difficult to kind of like delve into like, how, why are these things happening? So for season two, we wanted to give ourselves more room. You know, more room is kind of like the the entire goal of all of Myzelis is just like, give me more of everything that was good. So we gave ourselves more room in the backstory by basically saying, uh, there's more time for this stuff to develop. You know, instead of 15,000 years, sorry, 1,500 years of, or 2,000 years, I should say. I'm sorry, I don't want to keep saying 1,500. Rather than 2,000 years of recorded history, how about 50,000? How about Myzelis is billions of years old? You know, so that's the case here. Myzelis is as old as any other planet that you've ever lived on. Should be one, but I don't want to judge. Uh, and the recorded history goes through one time that's the mortal era, which is about I think it was 20,000, no, to 10,000 years, and then everything beyond that is the Aethri era, where the gods were basically being created from these proto-humanoids, these you know, for all intents and purposes, like changelings that were constantly changing their shape and constantly being transmuted by their own gods. So they evolved over time and just became all of the different races. And each one of our little campaign settings has a different explanation for that because it's a different culture that settled it, or a group of cultures in some cases. And those cultures have their own origin stories, they have their own origin myths, but they all fit within that like kind of 50,000 year shell. You know, and for comparison, you know, the history of like actual humanity is like 10,000 years. So, I mean, we gave ourselves 5 times the space and we basically said there's some magic involved, there's some gods, you know, the gods had whims, you know, and they just kind of did things. And things were constantly being transmuted and created, and the Aethri were basically constantly being changed into other things as they wanted to become them. You know, if they lived in a place where it was high up, they became Goliath. You know, if they lived in places near the ocean and they started to kind of swim for longer and longer, they became the Tritons. Um, if they lived kind of in between a bunch of different cultures, they started to just sort of like settle in the middle and they became humans, you know? And it isn't to say that like all Tritons are, you know, the entire race is this old. It's more like in this pocket of the world, Tritons are this old. And in this part of the world, Tritons are relatively new, you know, and that kind of thing. So uh, we wanted to give ourselves enough room for all of that to be true. And so part of that creation mythos is that basically all humanoids have the same progenitor. They all come from the same humanoid race, and that race we call the Aethri, which is why the city at the heart of everything is called Gilidson Aethri, because the one thing all of these different races have in common is that they were all Aethri, and they gathered at the heart of the map. And so Gilidson Aethri, the place where the Aethri gathered. In Aethri is a reference to Aethri, the incarnation of the will of the Aethri. So, uh, so that's worth knowing. That's something that like is more on the scholarly end because it has to do with like 10,000 plus years of history, but it is something that it wouldn't be illegal to know. Is that the A3 exist, or rather, the A3 did exist. In present day, there are no A3 left. Their story basically ends at the end of the Aethri era when things were starting to settle and the last of the A3 kind of assumed a form of another race and never transmuted back. And then they had kids and those kids had kids and then they just kind of started to become solidified into the races that you know. So yeah, sorry to go on that huge tangent, but that's what I do. So let's see, what's the next question here? If season 2 has enough love and patrons, would you think of making a campaign book of Myzelis? So this is one of the big things that they wanted to do with season 1, and when I came in, I had to be the party pooper because when you devise something based off of Dungeons and Dragons or any campaign setting really, to make sure that credit is put where credit is due, you have to be very careful about what you include. So that's unfortunately not a very easy question to answer. I just knew that the answer was no for season 1 because most of that campaign setting was baked around things that are proprietary WotC, Wizards of the Coast property. For instance, the fact that the warlocks of Keldon were all of those different subtypes, those different archetypes. Uh, the warlocks basically like what was it? There's a thing called the Open Gaming License for the Wizards of the Coast has, where you can publish things in your own campaign settings as long as it's from a very limited list of things that WotC offers. And on that list is the Fiend Pact Warlock, and that's it. If you publish anything that has to do with any other type of warlock, then you're encroaching upon WotC's proprietary stuff, basically. Um, so if we were to do a campaign setting, I would have to be a lot more careful about what I could publish versus what I wouldn't publish. But there is a workaround. There's a place on the internet called DM's Guild. And small known fact, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. DM's Guild is actually owned by Wizards of the Coast, and their whole thing is that they give you a expanded license to print proprietary information, such as, say, you wanted to publish a campaign in Faerun, and you're using all that proprietary information. They give you permission to do that, much more broad permission to do that. But you have to pay them more effectively. So it's still doable, and it would certainly be a lot safer for us if we did it through DM's Guild, but it certainly wouldn't support us as much. And I think the thing that we're trying to balance right now is ultimately the most important thing is we want you guys to have fun. So we've cut out aspirations of trying to do things that would require a lot more time for us to devise. Like, we'd have to come up with alternatives for a lot of things in order to make it separate enough that it wouldn't actually be infringing upon the open gaming license. So, I mean, I guess long story short is basically like we could do something like that, but we would rather spend that energy running games for you. So it's not to say that we've cut corners, but it's like we've certainly taken shortcuts that would be a problem if we tried to go that direction. But we took those shortcuts so that we could get to where we are faster so that we could run games in it. So I think it would be okay for us to publish stuff that has to do with the lore specifically. But as far as like a full campaign setting, probably not, I will say. But who knows? Like, I mean, if we had enough patrons, I'd ask more questions. I'll say that. All right. Aethri, let's see. In Season 1, when a party succeeded or failed epically at a world event, the rest of us felt and saw the effects in the world. How will that work for this season? For this world, sorry. I mean, the same way. I mean, I do get a lot of questions, a lot of them from the same person, but it's okay. I see you. I do get a lot of questions about world events. One of the problems that people had with world events in Season 1, well, okay, let's not start with the problems. One of the best things about world events, obviously, is getting all of you guys in the same room. It's loud, it's noisy, it's kind of chaotic sometimes. We try to manage it. We had those cool walls last time. That was really cool. But, like, being in the presence of all of your fellow gamers and getting to play at the same time is awesome. But we have to make sacrifices for that. And one of the biggest sacrifices, one of the things you really feel is we have to make the plot make sense. So we have to shoehorn things in. We have to make a reason for all of you guys to be in the same place at the same time. And furthermore, we have to make the plot streamlined enough that you don't wander off, But we also don't want you to feel like you don't have agency. So then we also have to bake in reasons that you would be wanting to follow that path, and then like kind of some options for going off the beaten path a little bit. So at least there's some variety. But it tends to get kind of hollow. And for a lot of people, it's not why they go to a world event in the first place. They usually go to a world event because they're like, I want a game with a bunch of other gamers. You know what I mean? I want to play my character. I want to go there and I want to I want to do whatever the big thing is, right? And so we don't have to think about it too hard, but we do have to think about it. We have to figure out how to make it make sense. So for season 2, as opposed to just basically trying to keep all of our DMs on the same schedule, because that was also a whole other thing, as opposed to having to do that, we are trying to make world events develop organically. So, and what I mean by that is my DMs have full authority to interact with each other's games and let one group of one campaign's problem become 2 campaigns as a problem, and then potentially 3 campaigns as a problem. If we wanted to have Vrokíva come and basically try to like wipe one of the settings off the map, we could do that, but it would be up to the DM that was running that setting, because it would be their setting at risk. And it would have to make sense for the plot for the players that are in that game. You don't want to be like, well, your game's on the chopping block because the rest of the DTU wants blood. You know what I mean? So, like, we could do that, but it wouldn't be fun for those people. And it also wouldn't be fun for other groups that might be like, well, we don't care about that. We've got this whole other thing going on. Why do we have to stop and go over there? So we're trying to make it develop organically, which is why I'm kind of cagey about like giving specifics about world events. We definitely want to do it because we love getting you guys all in the same room at the same time. But I guess the 2 big rules is it would have to make sense for the plot, and then we would have to basically provide an out for people who don't want to bring their prime characters. Like, we'd have to come up with some sort of a reward for you to take home, so to speak. But like, we'd have to basically set up a system where if you didn't have a reason to be there, like say your character is half a world away and there's no reason why they would be here right now, maybe we would just like invent a bunch of like groups that your character, like, you could make a character and it would just be, just a one-off, and you'd be part of the world event, but you wouldn't necessarily be in the world event with your prime character. You'd just be kind of like, you'd be one of the members of an army or something like that. And in that way, uh, you'd kind of already have the motivation. Like, your character would already have a reason to be there, so you could shortcut straight to the fields. You could be like, I'm fighting for the defense of this homeland that I've loved my whole life. But meanwhile, your main character's back there like, how do you spell that again? Um, and you'd be part of the history of that place. No matter what happened, we would record it, and we would, you know, write down the important things that happened and the important people who did them, which certainly would be the player characters. That's what you guys do. So it would probably be something like that. It would probably be a situation where we would have just the groups that are specifically interested in being part of that. And then we would have like a bunch of spots for people to just show up and play like kind of one-off characters. And that could be a lot of fun, honestly. I mean, you guys, if you play D&D, you're probably at least more than just a little bit good at roleplay. So if we give you a role, you should enjoy playing it. And we'd probably give you some choice. It'd be like, do you want to play this group or that group? So it also opens up the window for people to do things that might hurt their primary characters, but they'd still be into it. Like you could have people fighting against the faction of players. So I don't know, there could be an option for that. Let's see, what's next? Do dinosaurs exist? No. Yeah, they do. They exist. Yes, you have your dinosaurs. Um, expect that they primarily exist along the top of the Myzelis map that you see behind me, um, because that is like the hotter area. In terms of like the globe of Myzelis, the map that you see behind me is the southern hemisphere, one half of the southern hemisphere. And so the equator actually runs like a top the top of the letters right here. So that whole area is like the tropics, right along this spot. So you probably see more dinosaurs there. So lots of dinosaurs in Zane and Frederick's campaigns. But that isn't to say that there wouldn't be dinosaurs elsewhere, just more in those areas, probably. I don't know if that's news to Zane, but it should be. I see somebody typing. Real quick, I'm going to jump back up and keep going on the announcements. I just want to get through this stuff real quick. Launch date, you guys know, the week of the 28th of this month is when we start doing session zeros. Just so it's nice and clear, I've informed the DMs and basically made sure that we're all on the same page on this. They will be running a session zero as their first session. And the session zero, as opposed to like them helping you with character creation, a session zero is to get you guys to gel. So you have your characters already made, hopefully before that date and approved by your DM. And on that day, you get your characters together. They have the as D&D players like to call the tavern scene, where you guys meet up in the tavern or whatever the intro is. Hopefully not in a tavern, that's boring. But you have your get together, and you find out about each other, and maybe do some like soft role play that isn't really driven by the DM. And the DM does a lot of talking to explain to you the setting that you're in. You're in this city and it looks like this, and you've seen these things before, and if there's currently a festival going on, and blah 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 blah, like whatever they need to give you to get you immersed into that setting. So that way, when session 1 happens the week after that, you guys can hit the ground running. You already know what's going on, and you already have plenty to talk about in the week in between. So all of basically through the 28th through, what was that, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, yeah, the 28th through the 4th of October is all session zeros for every campaign. Let's see. And those sessions will be paid. Your DMs are working during that time. They've been working their butts off. Out of respect to them, I ask that you guys, please pay them for that session zero. They will earn it. Trust me. Some of you guys can. So we got the Season 2 Discord. Once again, Season 1 Discord will be open for a little bit longer, just to get, like wrap up anything that's going on over there. But eventually we will lock it. So there will be no new posts available on that Discord, and then close it. Not close it. We will lock it, and then it will be closed to posting, but you'll still be able to look at it and search it, so you can go back through old posts and things like that. We're not paying anything for it, so you guys can do that. That's fine. All right, let me jump back in and see what questions we got. Sean says, if a player establishes something about their hometown to their DM, there's a example, there's a headless night ghost that shows up sometimes in town. Does that info travel? Once again, I can. Whatever. Okay. Does that info travel to other DMs as possible plot hooks or points of interest if other player characters travel to that town? Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, excuse me, it's a dynamic world, just like it was in Season 1. If you do something in a town, say you buy all the shrimp. The next time somebody goes to that town, the DM may have made a note like, hey, yeah, you go to the town, you try to order the shrimp, raw the shrimp, or whatever. If you have an impact on the world, that impact should be indelible. It should still exist the next time that somebody goes there. And it's on the DMs to basically keep track of that stuff. But to that end, we have empowered the DMs to continue the process of having scribes, which you guys may remember from Season 1. Scribes are your way to basically keep track of things and put them on the world anvil. So when the players go to a town, the scribe in the party, which is basically a role that someone plays on behalf of the DM to track, to basically write everything down, so that it can later be uploaded, would make a note of it. So if the DM doesn't keep track of it, at least the scribe would, if your party has a scribe. Not my shrimp. So yeah, totally. I mean, that was the case in season one. We would totally keep track of stuff like that. Does level up depend on the DM or a time thing? Um, so we are doing uh, uh, milestone. Sorry, brain. We're doing milestone for sure. Um, we're still playing it by ear on whether or not all of the games are linked in terms of progression, because it's not that big of a deal anymore. We have a lot of like variety and versatility and like how we can handle campaigns interacting with each other. But more likely than not, we will try to keep it. We'll try to keep it close because people might change campaigns. Because we would not want a situation where somebody changed from one campaign to another and had to change their level to get there. So we may try to just keep campaigns within tiers. Might work okay. Like even if your character's a little bit behind in terms of levels, as long as you're still in the same tier, you should be all right. Because the monsters you'd be facing and like the challenges you'd be facing would be commensurate to your tier. Um, and overall, like I doubt any one campaign is going to be too far behind the others. Knowing from season one, there was kind of like a certain speed people were generally going. Like maybe a month or two between levels typically, or at least like generally speaking, towards the end. So, I mean, it's not something I can necessarily answer super well right now because we're just trying to see what works best. And it may work out better if we do keep everybody on the same level. But I mean, we don't want to hamper the DM's ability to run what they wanted to run for you. So if they had something planned out and it's worth a certain amount of XP, we don't want a situation where like you fight something really tough and then you just don't get recognition or XP for it. That sucks. um, but we also don't want a situation where people feel like they're super far behind. Uh, if like a campaign is kind of sparse with the XP or there's a lot of role play or something like that, we don't want you to feel like, you know, you could just see the rest of the DTU just passing you by. People in the chats are always talking about like, oh, all of my wishes or whatever, and you're like, I got a stick and it shoots lasers, like whatever. So it is milestone, but we'll revisit if we need to tweak it at all. Can I have an estimate of the known population of Myzelis? Um, well, I can tell you right now, 1.5 million people live in Gilead, roughly. Between all the different townships, um, the actual city itself, where there's about 500,000 people that live inside that kind of central city. And then throughout like the rest of that island, there's about 1.5 million people. Um, I don't know when it comes to the other campaign settings. So that's definitely a question you'd want to ask your DMs. It may not be something that is relevant to their campaigns, over like say telling you how many people live in the cities that you visit. It may not be something that they've necessarily put a lot of brain power towards, because it might not be relevant to their campaign. It might just be like, you see a big city and there's people in it, like, here you go. But for those that have thought of it, they may have an answer for you. I just know that I can tell you for Gilead that when you're there, it is a metropolis. It is a big city, and there's a lot of people that live there, and not all on the surface too. By the way, a good like third of the city is underground in the Underdark. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, let me hop back up to the announcements. Try and burn through some more of this. Okay, so signups. Hopefully the signups situation has been relatively painless for all of you. We did put into the user's guide a listing with everybody's names and whatnot. There's a fair amount of reading that goes into if you're actually to go into the announcement channels for each campaign to figure out when their campaign is. It's usually the second line, like what time of day and when, who's running it, and that sort of stuff. But by this point, generally what people should know is that we're basically having like kind of a pre-sign up going on right now, because we don't want it to be a situation where it's first come first serve period. I played a lot of D&D. Oh, here I go again, right? I played a lot of D&D, and I know for a fact that sometimes a group of players does not mesh well. Sometimes a group of players does not get together as perfectly as you would want, and it causes problems when you're trying to run for that game, for that group, because they're still trying to fit with each other. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And so sometimes when the DMs go through and they basically are trying to figure out who is playing in their game and who isn't, when we were doing signups through the store, we tried to have some control over it, to just try and make sure that like the DMs had some control over making sure that like the group that they're running for is consistent for a story reason, so to make sure that like the story continues to make sense, but is also consistent, like so that there isn't like a clash of attitudes and conflicts between people. Which isn't to say that like any of you are worse or better than the others. It's more like sometimes just your personalities clash, and that's just the way it is, right? So they didn't really have as much control over that when we were doing signups through the store. Signups now, like what are happening right now, are being kind of curated by the DMs to just go off of kind of existing what they know about you as players from season one, so that they can like basically create a list of the players for their game that they know mesh well, right? It isn't to say that there isn't going to be room for all of you. It's just that if they have to choose, they are choosing with criteria that they have baked into their brains. A DM that had already had a group of 8 people that they'd run for traditionally, that knows that those 8 people are great friends and are going to work very well together, and play well together, like, Godspeed, more power to you. Most of the time, it's not going to be that way. There are certainly some DMs that have kind of already hit their cap. There are some DMs that still went first come, first serve and just said, the group is the group, you know what I mean? But most of the time there is room, at least from what I can tell from the different groups that are out there right now. Most of these groups have room. So signups shouldn't run into an issue where the DM has to pick, like, do I want this player in my campaign versus this player in my campaign? But I'm saying all this because I don't want anyone to feel like this is a judgment about your character. Like, if we let you play in the DTU at all, you've already passed what we require of you as a person. We want people to play. Like, if we didn't let you play at one of our games, we probably don't let you play. Like, and we've kicked people out before. So if you're in the DTU right now, any one of us would be happy to run for you. It's just sometimes there may be a situation where we have to like look at the personalities of people involved and just pick something, like a group that makes sense for that. But for most of these games, I doubt it's going to be an issue. And I already have DMs that are already kind of weighing their options of running another game. So even if we fill up all of these games between now and September 28th, we may, excuse me, we may just open up more games. So, like, I'm not super worried about it. You guys shouldn't be either. We know you want a game, and we had a pretty good grasp of it before, so it should still work out. Let's see. Is there hell in Myzelis? Okay, let's talk about planes. The prime material plane is what it is. It's got the fog, the broom. It's got the Leylines and everything, right? There are other outer planes that are the coterminous planes. It's a big fancy word for basically saying they overlap. These planes include the Feywild, the Shadowfell, the Ethereal plane. These planes basically sit on top or directly under, in the Shadowfell's case, the prime plane, and they are a reflection of it, right? And those are universal. There are spells that refer to them. When you conjure creatures from other places, when you use blink, like that kind of stuff, you are going very specifically to one of those planes. But they are pretty much universal across the board for every setting in Myzelis. Every setting has an ethereal plane, a Feywild, a Shadowfell, and then it has that connective tissue plane, which is basically the one that touches every plane and kind of is the the, the soup that they're all sitting in, and that's the astral plane. And that's the one that you go through when you teleport and things like that. Every setting has those. What they have and elemental planes. Sorry, the plane of fire, air, water, and earth and heart. No, wait, that's Captain Planet. So those four elemental planes are also somewhat coterminous, although they aren't reflections. They're kind of like inner planes. They're like just on the edges. And then outside of that, it entirely depends upon the gods of that campaign setting. But traditionally, the way that it works is those outer planes are completely controlled and were created by individual in Aethri. So if there is to use your hell example, if there is a Asmodeus in a particular campaign setting, or a Tiamat, or any other deity that would have been from hell, back in season 1, it would have been what's your name? Vespida. Oh, goodness, sorry. It's been so long. If there was a Vespida equivalent in a campaign setting, say if in Rilamir there's a Vespida-ish character, not the exact same god, but a Lord of Hell, effectively, then that person would have an outer plane that you would consider to be Hell, traditionally. It's entirely up to the DM, though. The DMs basically get to write their whole outer plane schema. It could be that there are as many different outer planes as there are deities. It could be that there is one outer plane and the deities control different sections of it, and it's just a big ring or something like that. It could be that they don't have an outer plane and the gods just walk among you and they just hang out for some reason. The point is that it's entirely dependent upon where you are. But if you are a character that is from a particular campaign setting and you go to another one, you still have access to the outer planes where you came from. So, and the main reason why this might be relevant is if, say you were a warlock, and you were a fiend warlock and you entered into a pact with a devil, and your original DM had you go to hell and talk to this devil, and the devil gave you powers and said, bring me back chimichangas from Rilamir, right? And then you went and switched tables and you went over to Frederick's game, and for whatever reason, Frederick did not have that same hell. When you cast Plane Shift, or attempt to basically go to commune with your patron, you would go back to the one that reflects your original patron. So you would go to that hell. You may not go to Rilamir's hell, but you would go back to the one that's relevant to you. And certainly, like if you had sold your soul or whatever and you were doomed to go to that hell when you died, you would go to that hell. You would not go to, whatever Frederick had cooked up for the outer planes. Same thing's true for any other plane. If you were a celestial warlock and you were trying to consult with an angel you knew, you would be consulting with an angel on the plane that the original DM had run their game for. And that's just to make sure that people aren't mixing up, like, one DM isn't telling another DM what they're doing with their outer planes. So there's enough room. Again, lots of room. So all the DMs have their ability to make their own. When it comes to Gilead, because again, a lot of these answers have to do with what I can tell you about Gilead's and Aethri, because the hub city is basically my baby. Mine engages, basically. There are something like 100 gods just in Aethri. Like we tried to give you guys, again, lots of variety. And so we're cooking those up and we're going to post them once we have basically kind of like an encyclopedia page for each one so that you know what they're about. But these gods all have their own outer planes. Like the vast majority of them, pretty much all of them have their own. So if you were to, if you were to basically need to know about a hell, like if you wanted to make a character who was a fiend warlock and you were about to play them in a game in someone else's campaign setting and they hadn't really thought of a hell, we're trying to make sure we've got your back. So we will have created multiple gods who reflect, that sort of lawful evil outsider devil's situation, and give you some variety so that you can pick one that works best for you. So, TLDR, the long story short answer to your question, is there a hell? There are many, and you will have your pick, or one will be picked for you. Next question. Do each campaign have different tech levels? Some campaign sword and sorcery and some Star Trek. If so, how do they interact? Okay, so this is another big thing. And it has to do with the broom. Again, here comes the broom, right? Giving all the campaigns enough room to coexist does not mean just giving them enough physical space. It also means giving some DMs an opportunity to set their own technology levels and others a different technology level. Some DMs have certain restrictions for certain magic items. In some DMs' campaigns, their magic items work completely differently. So I'm like super blurry right now. What? Whoa. The mist is making me blurry. Sorry about this, by the way. I'm gonna get a better webcam if I'm doing these on a regular basis. Um, what was I saying? Oh, about the different deck levels. So basically, in order to give them that much room, we are saying that the different ley lines that these civilizations live on have affinities for different levels of technology and different levels of magic. Generally speaking, technology will not change too much between settings, although you may notice that in some settings, say gunpowder doesn't work the same. So your ranger that may be using a gun may need to relearn how to use a bow if you're there. But generally speaking, everything at the base PHB equipment list is allowed in every setting. It's just the stuff above and beyond that that might be different. But mostly it pertains to magic. Some campaign settings, like there's one in particular where they are not going to allow the use of magic items that set ability scores. So gauntlets of ogre power don't work while you're there. So you'd have to attune to something else. If your build is contingent upon that, you'll have to figure out something else real quick. But the idea is that the ley lines basically interfere with certain types of magic. Generally speaking, though, the biggest disparity between technology will be whether or not some campaign settings are high magic or low magic. So the big thing that you're going to see is that in some campaign settings, you may have more of a, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but the Eberron campaign setting uses flying ships and lightning rail trains and things like that. And magic is relatively ubiquitous. It's everywhere. The capital city, like the biggest city in Eberron, Sharn, is like vertical. And so people that live at the top so that they don't die, get handed out like featherfall tokens, and it takes like a certain amount of those every day just to make sure that you're safe, like that kind of thing. But it just means that magic is very ubiquitous. Some campaign settings are going to be like that, where just magic and technology are smushed together and it's everywhere, right? Some campaign settings are going to be low magic, where they're just like, there's the magic you got that you brought with you, and then good luck finding a magic item. But that's the story they wanted to tell. And so a lot of these campaigns have tags that are supposed to tell you beforehand. And of course, you can ask the DMs as well. You can tell you beforehand some of this so that you know going into it, because we don't want you to be surprised. We don't want you to walk into a campaign and be like, does magic work here the same? And for the DM to be like, no, but the campaign starts tomorrow, so I mean, I hope you got your character ready or whatever. Like, we want people to be advanced, to know in advance about that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, pretty much everything from like low magic, like Conan style sword and sorcery, to like magical trains that go normal speeds for trains in real life, like that kind of stuff. Airships and whatever, like they're out there. Okay, let me hop back up to the announcements real quick. First of all, thank you guys for sticking around. I know not everybody was able to stick around, but again, I am recording this and I'll be uploading it later. My blurry face and all. So, the next thing I want to talk about is the social media. If you haven't already, it would be a great help if you were to go to the link tree, which should be in the user guide as well, and at the bottom of the announcements, and just basically like and possibly share the Facebook and Twitter accounts if you have those accounts, or to share basically any like the link tree itself or any of that kind of stuff. Because we're not in a store running D&D this way, we're kind of invisible to the rest of the world. Whereas when we were in the store, people could walk by the storefront who didn't even go in Dark Tower. They could see you guys sitting at D&D tables. People who go into the store could see and hear you guys playing and having a ton of fun in the back of the store. In a digital format, they can't do any of those things. They can't see us doing any of this stuff. So in order to kind of like make up for that, getting the word out is really important. So, I mean, this isn't a situation where I'm like a single YouTuber. Like I'm not Jacksepticeye or something like that. Just like, like, subscribe, hit the button, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, if you guys want more people to play with, you've got to help me tell people about the DTU. So the more you spread the word, the more people play with us. When people start stepping back, like, hey, I don't have time to play anymore, someone else is already there to keep playing. Like, one of the biggest things and most important things about the DTU is its sustainability. And the sustainability is only possible, like, in order for you guys to play every week, we need more players. And the number of players needs to keep growing, to make room for people to have lives. Like sometimes you're like, you know what, I just don't feel like playing this week. It shouldn't be an end to your campaign if enough people feel that way. Because some of you guys are like, I'm in it for the long haul. I want to play every week, blah, blah, blah. But some people are like, you know what, I've played enough D&D. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to take a break or whatever, and in order to make room for that, but still have a DTU, you've got to fill it. So we need more word out. We need more people talking about it. And because we're playing online, like, we have access to like everybody that has an internet connection and can run Roll20 and Discord, So if you know people that live anywhere that can make these game times, invite them. Like, even if they can't come into the store, if you know it's an online game, invite them. Let's play with them. I would love to meet these people. So, and I know your DMs would too. Let me hop back to questions. Let's see what we got here. Willa says, do people come and believe it's the power behind the magic or intent behind the magic that upsets Vrokíva, and how is that generally perceived? Like, say I'm a cleric casting Hollow. I cast it once, it's a 5th level spell, it does have a lingering effect. Versus I cast Forbiddance once, it's a 6th level spell, it wears off. More powerful, but not as impactful. Now, if I keep coming back and doing Forbiddance, that makes it linger, so it's not just a happenstance of magic lingering, it's me having a lasting effect. So, it is a metaphysical question. And by metaphysical, I mean the answer out of character and in character align. Out of character, straight up, it's a mechanic to keep people from abusing loopholes in the DT, like in Dungeons and Dragons. People who have, like, when they get to the point where they can cast a simulacrum and having their simulacrum get turned into a dragon and then having that dragon cast simulacrum. That's the sort of stuff that we're trying to curtail back. And it's not a situation where we're just going to be like, oh, you got access to a toy and you immediately started abusing it, you die. It's a situation where we can basically create a boogeyman that says, maybe you don't do that. Maybe you keep it on the down low. Maybe you do just one simulacrum and you take good care of it or whatever. Maybe you don't grab a bunch of immovable rods and try and stop the planet. Maybe you maybe you don't uh, create like destroy the economy of a certain country because you can make infinite amounts of mustard. Like we're just trying to make it so that there is an explanation in character for us to avoid weird situations where the rules allow for loopholes for people to just have infinite resources, or to really just bend things out of whack. Um, and so to that end, in character, Vrokíva sees all. So it's kind of a DM fiat thing where they can just be like, hey, out of game, I'm warning you right now, that's going to be a problem. In game, I have a way to solve it. Like, and you don't want me to do that. So maybe let's dial it back a little bit. And your DM should work with you to just help you figure out where that comfy zone is. Like, we want you to play with the toys. We just don't want you to like ruin it. Like don't go nuts. Um, so generally speaking, like for your examples, like Vrokíva should not have a problem with you casting Hollow or Forbiddance. Like if you're doing what the spell tells you you can do, and it's like you're just setting up a permanent magical zone. Oh, I should say, Vrokíva cares and will want to destroy it, but not especially so. Not to the tune of like coming out of nowhere and like destroying you, like might happen if, say, you try to destroy an end boss of a campaign by putting a bag of holding inside another bag of holding. You do that, Vrokíva instantly shows up and snatches you. So, like that's the kind of stuff we're trying to avoid. We don't want two, 500 gold piece magic items to, destroy a campaign. So that's the stuff you'd have to worry about. If you're not doing that kind of stuff, you should never have to worry about it. Like Vrokíva will still come after you and kill you, but it won't be. Is there a god that is Vrokíva's opposite? Um, Vrokíva is opposed basically by gods of civilization. Um, Vrokíva is violently opposed by gods that are like ones that kind of deny the power, even to this day, the power of nature, and are just like industrious to the core. Like they're like if there was a god of Exxon, you know what I mean? Like if there was a god of like well, I think there is a particular campaign. I think Left Kevin's campaign is going to be kind of about this. But basically, if there are groups in the world and gods in the world that have to do with like civilization first and only, and it doesn't matter how much of the world we destroy, we're just trying to get the most out of it. Those would definitely be the opposite of Vrokíva. But as a general rule, most gods that support, most in Aethri that support humanoid civilization are opposed by Vrokíva. And so they are natural enemies. Vrokíva is strong enough to fight all of them at once, and that's important to know. But, she can lose individual battles. It's definitely a stalemate. So, I mean, there's not really a god that's on par with Vrokíva in terms of power level, except maybe like the Inkari of Myzelis itself, or like the Inkari of the Suns, the Mahaladrod, or Akar as they are also, or Ahar. Sorry, I said the word wrong. Like there are some strong gods out there, but they're like an epic scale. But they're not like anti Vrokíva. They're not like the un-Vrokíva where they're like the Great Leaf Blower or something like that. So not exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just not fun to do the Artificer Bag of Holding Bomb. Like, sorry, not sorry. Like, it's not a compelling story unless that's what the DM wanted to run, and I don't know any DMs that wanted to run the Artificer Bag of Holding Bomb story. They had other plans. Okay, going back up to the announcements. World Anvil, we've made a new World Anvil. We'll be populating it as fast as possible. We also want to populate the World Anvil, so expect that it will continuously be updated. And I'll try to, as we present things, as we get like big chunks of information up there, and as I get a better webcam, I will try to do like a kind of a showcase of those things. I'll write an actual script, so I'm not meandering like I was today, but like I'll try and present it to you multiple different ways to make sure that you get it all. But also to just notify you that it's there. We want you to be aware that the World Anvil is up. DTU store and Patreon. I'm going to go into this just real quick, just because it is important. Your DMs are getting paid for the tickets that you pay. You sit down, you play with that person for 2 or 4 hours or however long. All that money goes straight to those DMs, and they deserve it, to be perfectly honest. But all this stuff that you see on the outer edges, me doing this video, me making the maps, Gage answering your questions almost the moment that you hit the enter key on the Discord, or categorizing, or like making sure that all of our DMs have information, access to information that they otherwise wouldn't. A lot of the glue of this basically comes down to work that Gage and I put in the background, and also a lot of work that my fellow DMs do above and beyond as well, such as coming in for meetings and just doing that kind of stuff. So going in and basically getting stuff off of our store, which I can update like whenever. Like, if you guys come up with a cool idea for like a new t-shirt, it costs me nothing. I can just design it and you guys can buy it like the same day. Like, that's a thing. So like, if you guys have a funny idea, if a bunch of you sit there and go, oh man, the Loud and Rowdy, like, I just thought of an idea for like a t-shirt or something like that, I can do that. I can make that happen. And I am currently wearing a shirt from there, and I've owned this shirt since like June, and it is still holding up great. So like, they have all kinds of cool products on there, but basically they kick back a little bit and I put it in the fund for the DTU. And then the Patreon, which some of you are already Patreon supporters. Thank you very much for that. But basically that Patreon is kind of like how Gage and I get paid. And we pay the DMs for meetings and for rewards and things like that out of that. So, like, even if it's like $3 or something like that, or God forbid, you can do the 25 like a lot of you have, which again, thank you. Like, per month, it basically just means that we can do this stuff in the background more often, and we can make more for you to look at and fill out the world more in the seams and the cracks in between, so that there's more for you to immerse yourselves in, because that's really important. I think immersion is kind of the whole point, right? We want to be immersed in a fantasy setting. So I mean, even if you can't personally buy anything off of there, sharing that with other people or just reminding them about it, about the Patreon, about the stores, greatly appreciated. We really appreciate that, you guys. Okay, let's see what other questions we got here. Question rescinded. Praise the Roomba. Yes, praise the Roomba. Eldritch Roomba Gage had a great phrase earlier, to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit. One of our other DMs said, what did they say? They said something about like, where I could find something, and Gage found it immediately. And Gage said, I beep so you all can boop. I love it. I love it. That's exactly how it works too, by the way. Like, Gage is just this catch-all, like just this amazing network in the back of everything that really makes stuff work. So thank you, Gage. Okay, let's see. Other than Vrokíva, what's the most important thing for people to know about Myzelis? Well, probably the. Well, okay, let's see. The biggest thing about Myzelis, like the biggest takeaway that you can know about Myzelis, is that it is a world of many different settings that are connected kind of in the middle, so to speak, like metaphysically connected in the middle. Like, if you wanted to explain Myzelis to another person, probably the best thing that you could say is that it is just a Christmas tree of campaign settings. And there may be a lot of nettles in between, you know, like there are in a Christmas tree. Like it might be kind of spiky in between, but there are these amazing and beautiful settings just sparkling all throughout the tree, and they are all connected at the same root. Um, and they're all, beautiful and weird and different in their own ways. And you can enjoy any one of them, but you have access to all of them. And that's just like, that's exactly what I was going for. And I'm so happy that it's working out that way. It's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I would probably be like the biggest thing if you wanted to like explain it about Myzelis. In terms of sheer size, the biggest thing that you could know about Myzelis that you might have skimmed over when you were reading about the description is that Myzelis has a ring like Saturn. It is a massive ring that runs all the way around the planet. And it is made up mostly of debris from an impact against one of the other moons. Because there's one moon that looks like your traditional like kind of moon like we have. It's a little bit bigger though. But there's another celestial object up there that's kind of been like cracked and crunched. It looks like an egg that's been smushed and has cracks all over it. That's like a fraction of the size, and pieces of it that broke off when it was impacted against have formed into this massive ring. And so when you look up into the night sky, your view of certain parts of the sky might be obscured somewhat by this huge ring shooting out into space. It's pretty cool. What is my favorite thing about the new world? My favorite thing. Getting to be here since day one. One of my biggest problems about season one was that if I wanted to know something about things that came before my time, um, sometimes that stuff was just gone. Like some DMs, or not some DMs, but some players might know about it because they'd have been there since the beginning. But like if I wanted to talk to my team about something, like it might have been run by somebody who's no longer there. It might be just lost. And being able to be here for the beginning of season two and actually be part of the whole thing from the very beginning is huge. Like being able to catalog all of it and being able to reference it, having documents for everything is going to make things so much better from behind the screen, and also way better for you guys. Because now when you ask questions like this, like we never did anything like this for season one, because you guys would have asked me all kinds of questions. I'd have been like, I don't know, you know, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know anything about that. But this season, I can tell you, or if I can't tell you, I can tell you who does. So it's really awesome. Oh, downtime. Okay. So when it comes to downtime, another thing that the mist does, it's kind of wibbly wobbly, and this is something you'll need to work with us on because we're doing it this way out of necessity, but also just for quality of life. Uh, Travel between different parts of Myzelis through the mists takes variable amounts of time. Usually it takes just the amount of time it takes to physically travel that distance, but sometimes time is different in different parts of Myzelis. So you may be in your campaign doing things, whatever's going on, and then the DM says, all right, let's take like a month of downtime. What do you guys want to do? You know, you guys want to sit around and craft something? What do the rest of you want to do? And meanwhile, in the rest of Myzelis, in other people's campaigns, they haven't had 30 days pass. And even though that means that now, like in the real world, you know, some campaigns will be ahead in terms of time, for the sake of like kind of the ease of being able to have you guys still be able to interact, um, you still can. So if you're like an example, say you're playing in a campaign, you're playing in Left Kevin's campaign, Kevin Lake's campaign. Sorry, we call him Left Kevin. And he gives you 30 days of downtime, and then you take your character and you move over to Rilamir. You go over here to Frederick's campaign. It doesn't matter where in the timeline Kevin's campaign versus Frederick's campaign are. You can just hop over, and as long as you don't make a big deal out of it, we don't care. Like, as long as you're not trying to game the system by hopping back and forth between tables, we don't have to send Vrokíva after you. You can just show up in another campaign, and we'll just hand wave the time and just say, yeah, no, you're there now. It's fine, and you'll just be in that point in that period. So, and the reason I said all that, like it doesn't strictly have to do, but it does. That's just how we're doing downtime. So downtime now is entirely whatever the players want to do. Like the DMs may still have stuff going on in the background that you won't be able to be like, well, I'm just going to take 2 years off. Okay, well the big bad evil guy destroys you, you know, like that. You still have to keep track of that. But like, if it makes sense for your story for there to be downtime for you to make a magic item, then you do. And now it doesn't matter. I don't have to keep track of it. We're not like trying to keep you on track for a world event or something, you know, or forcing you to take downtime because we have to get you up to a certain date in the point in the story. Now you can just do it when it makes sense. So, making a magic item, uh, establishing a stronghold, crafting, you know, a big old like castle or something like that, or whatever you want to do. If it makes sense to your story, then you will. Yes, I'm going to be posting this to YouTube. I'll be cleaning it up. I'll try and like add like images or maybe like at least like the written versions of you guys' questions, so that way, basically it's you know, you guys keep track of it. Maybe like make timestamps and stuff. But I will be posting this onto YouTube for later consumption, but also for the people who weren't here or had to leave or something. And then, is there anything world big bad evil guy like the 13th Lord? Not going to tell you. Sorry. The only one, okay, there's one, Vrokíva. Outside of that, I am not at liberty to say. The 13th Lord. Demoted. Yeah, even demoted from the 14th Lord to the 13th Lord. It's too bad, Valkar. Okay, let's see. I don't think there's anything else to go over on the announcements. Let's see. Was there anything else I wanted to go over on the website? Just real quick. Let's see. Introduction to Myzelis. That's something you guys can read on your own time. Setting rules. Yeah, the setting rules page is really important to each campaign. Every DM will be posting basically their list of what rules they're allowing and which ones they aren't. And if they have any custom setting specific rules, will also go in there, literally their table rules. But the ones that are kind of like universal are on that page. Languages, dunamancy, things the entire DTU uses, like we all do adamantine weapons. We're all crafting magic items using the Xanathar's rules. We're all allowing you to, excuse me, to do your own 27 point buy. We all allow feats. We're all doing milestones. We're all allowing multi-classing. So, but the ones that are below that are basically things that you can either reference from existing published books or the very specific DTU variants that we may or may not allow in individual campaigns. Those are things you'd have to ask your DM about, but that is an important page to keep track of, so that way you know what those rules are. Okay, how does the heritage thing in character creation work? I'm still a little confused on it. Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, so originally with D&D in the past, if you were an elf, you had +2 dex, you had +1 to another ability score that was based on your subtype of elf. If you were a wood elf, it was +1 wisdom. If you were a high elf, it was +1 intelligence. You get the idea. But all elves were the same. If you were an elf, you were dexterous. That's just how it is. Furthermore, another thing that was never addressed is kind of the cross-pollination of different races, you know? Not to get too much into it, but basically if, like, two different races loved each other very much, we wanted it to kind of be possible for them to have kids, and for those kids to have potentially a different look, you know? So it's not just humans making half-orcs and half-elves, but basically just an opportunity for your heredity to come from wherever your imagination takes you. And so to allow this to happen, we basically wanted to set up a system where your race no longer determined what you would be good at, because that's not true in real life, and we didn't need it to be true in this game. Certainly not in this fantasy setting. And then we also wanted to make sure that people could just look like whatever they wanted to look like, and it doesn't matter, you know? So to allow that to happen, we have the heritage rules. The ones that we have in the character creation guide are kind of like a lot of things that are in there are kind of placeholders for what is going to be adopted once Tasha's Cauldron of Everything comes out in November, late November of this year. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is basically just this big catch-all UA book, and it's also going to include the official heritage rules. So all the stuff that we're talking about right now is basically going to be like baked in, and it's also going to be included in D&D Beyond and just kind of all solidified in there. But the long and the short of it is this. If you play a character who is descended from two different races, say you were a elf, or your father was an elf and your mother was an orc, you can now play a character that has physical characteristics of each, where you basically look like the child of those two races. And when you're deciding whether or not you want to, like which ability score set and abilities, racial abilities you want to use, you can pick one or the other. So for game balance reasons, the new heritage rules that are coming out in Tasha's are actually going to allow you to, I think, customize where you can take some pieces and move them around. But for our sake of like sanity and just trying to make sure that everything makes sense for our DMs, we're just saying pick one or the other. So if you were to make a descended from an orc and an elf, for instance, you would pick the entire orc stat block. So all of their abilities, all of their ability score bonuses, you know, their ability to, I think it's like a bonus action move towards a hostile creature, and their +2 strength and +1 to another ability score. I don't remember exactly what it is, but like all of their stuff versus all of the elf stuff, proficiency in perception and, you know, their dark vision and their +2 to dex and their +1 to something else. You would take all of one or the other, and you would just take like basically all of those, and you would make your character based on that. So for instance, you could be like, well, I play a half orc, or sorry, a half elf, half orc, who is big and burly, right? Like I'm big and strong, and I'm kind of green, but I have huge elf ears and long, like smooth, long flowing hair, or something like that. Like you could do that, and then you would mechanically go and say, I'm using the orc stat block. What's that? Or half orc, sorry. You could also pick half orc. I mean, the idea is that basically you'd be picking a stat block that makes sense for your character. But you would only use that one. So for mechanics purposes, you're basically either picking orc, half orc, or elf. And any type of elf, really. And then when you figure out your ability score bonuses, instead of saying, like, let's say you were like, well, I'm going to make him be an orc, like in terms of stats. Normally, an orc would be +2 to strength and some other stuff. With our new system, you don't have to assign it to strength. So if you have a +2 to strength normally, and a +1 to, say, I think it's like wisdom or something like that, you can take those ability score modifiers and put them on whatever other ability scores you want. So now you could have an orc, a half orc, half elf that has +2 to charisma and +1 to dexterity. Or you could have, +2 to intelligence and +1 to wisdom. We don't care. You're just a wise or insightful or intelligent or charismatic half orc, half elf. Go for it. Your other abilities would still be the same. So if you chose you chose the orc stat block, you would still have all the other abilities of an orc. But your ability scores would be wherever you wanted. Yeah, and half elf would work as well. Half elf, half orc, orc, or elf. Like with all of those ability stat blocks would work. You just pick one, and then you'd go with that one, and then your character would look like whatever combination you want to. And that's just to give you that versatility. You don't have to make a character that's always the same, because I know that with 27 point buy, it can kind of feel like you have to play certain races and class combinations together. And we're making it so that's no longer the case. You can play whatever, and it will still work because your stat bonuses will still go to the thing your class needs to be good at if you want to. Yeah, half elf, half goblin. Somebody asked a really great question recently where they were like, what happens if somebody is a warforged that looks like a gnome? And I was like, then you are a gnome. Like, you basically are a warforged that's the size and shape of a gnome. Your creator literally was just trying to make a gnome warforged. Like, there you go. And you could use the stat block for gnome or the stat block for warforged. You get all the abilities of one or the other. It's up to you. So that's basically what we were going for. And as a side note, when it comes to the size is kind of disconnected. If you are small, then you use the small part of your stat block. So if you're a goblin, you would be small, but you'd still have a speed of 30. But if you were more taking after, say, if you were a warforged goblin, you could be small size and you would have a speed of 30, but you'd be small. Or you could be a full-sized warforged that just looked like a goblin, but just be normal size, which is weird, but I mean, go for it, right? But you would not be small size. You'd be normal, medium size. Yeah, so I mean, that's basically how that works. Does that answer your question? Does that make it a little bit easier to comprehend? Like we're really just trying to let you pick the stat block you want, and then flavor it however you like that makes sense for that race, whatever combination of races you were going for. In the meantime, while you get back to me, yeah, it is a special case, but we'll get there. In the meantime, let's say we're using a UA class when the new book comes out and there are changes to the class. Do we use the new changes or keep the old? Always use the new changes. One of our biggest caveats, and I believe it says it on the character creation guide, is that everything that you play that's UA is always subject to change. And if it gets balanced, if it gets published, it's been balanced. It's been rebalanced. So we're always updating to the latest version of that stat block. So there are certain things that are confirmed to be coming out in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. People who are playing with that UA, such as the class feature variants, will have to update to whatever the new version of that stat block is. And your DM will work with you to make it make sense. So, like, if you took certain things and now it no longer makes sense for you to have your stats arranged a certain way, or you took a feat and it now is irrelevant, we will let you, do some minor rebuilding to make your character still make sense. So, like, we'll work with you. Let's see. Yes, and that is in the character creation guide. It does say that right where Gage linked it, and we will show it on the VOD here. I don't know, maybe. So, yeah. Okay, I think that was everything from the announcements channel. Is there anything else on the website I want to go through? Really do bookmark the website. It answers a lot of questions. Read it front to back, however that works for a website. Read the whole thing. It's daunting, I'm sure, but like it's important stuff. It's all relevant. If we put it on there, it is relevant to you. The only caveat is if you're new to D&D and you don't like it's really overwhelming, we totally understand. If you just want to make a character that uses the rules from the player's handbook, that is still valid. If you don't want to mess around with this whole heritage rules thing, if you just want to make an elf ranger good with a bow, everything from the player's handbook is allowed. So I say go for it. And that's actually at the top of the character creation guide. It literally says, if you are looking to make a standard character, a basic character, and are new to D&D, the entirety of the player's handbook is approved for use. So just make a character from the player's handbook. It should be just fine. You'll have just as much fun, I promise you. Yeah, I think that's everything from the website I wanted to go over. Let me make sure. Yeah. And I did mention about the gods and patrons. Expect that those will get dropped between now and the start of season 2's games, the session 0 games. We're just basically trying to make sure that there's enough information for you to understand the gods, because right now they're kind of just a big list with like bullet points, and we want to flesh that out so they're more compelling for you than just that, because they're up here, but they need to be written down. But yeah, are there any other questions? Anything else anybody wants to ask while you have my attention? Otherwise, we will wrap this guy up. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss any questions. I don't think so. Here we go. I see somebody typing. We'll see what they say. Thank you all for being here, by the way. I appreciate it. And if you're watching this from YouTube, thank you for watching it, being there. Like I said, we're doing this stuff because we want it to be extra clear for you. So expect that I will be doing more videos like this because not everybody learns in the same way. Some people, they see a wall of text, they go through it, they read it front to back, done, right? Some people, they need basically they've got a different learning style, and that's totally cool. Like, I completely understand. I certainly have a learning style, and that's that I have to see something, I have to read it in front of my eyes. Like, I can't just be told things. It's valid. Let's see. People are still typing. There's big. Oh, here we go. Make sure I understood. You take the looks of one race and the stats of another. For example, how would I get a small tabaxi-looking character? So for that case, you could say that your heredity comes from. You could be like, I am descended from a gnome and a tabaxi, and you would basically say, I'm going to use the tabaxi stats, but I'm going to use the gnome size. Probably wouldn't want to use gnome. Well, I mean, you could use gnome because it would basically be 25-foot speed, and I know tabaxi are very protective of their speed. So maybe you could do like a tabaxi like goblin or a tabaxi kobold, which would be kind of interesting. Like how you would look, that'd be really interesting. But basically, you would pick a race for your heredity that would help flavor how your character looks. That would be small. and then you could basically take the small size. Because again, size is separate from the rest of the stat block. So you could be also small in addition to an entire other stat block for Tabaxi in this case. Yeah. So that's how I would do that. I would be like, oh, I'm a gnome. I'm basically, my father was a gnome and my mother was a Tabaxi. Like that's how it worked. Or at some point in my heredity, somebody, it was a whole clan of Tabaxi, but there was one gnome that kind of seduced somebody up in there, and then I just, I came out a little short. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you guys have any other questions in the future going forward, you are certainly welcome to ask those questions in the questions and answers channel like you have been. We will get to them as soon as we can. And thank you once again for being here for this video. Your participation shows me that you care, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and we'll see you guys out there. You're welcome. And have a good day.